Hey everybody. I can be quite stubborn. Kind of always been that way. Sometimes I take a harder road than I need to in my stubbornness. Sometimes it pays off. Sometimes not so much. I make things quite a bit harder. I got to go back and redo some things because I was stubborn about it. It is sometimes a strength and sometimes a weakness. But anyway, I was thinking about what it means when we have to set new boundaries. Sometimes we've been doing something and find that it doesn't work. It's wearing us down, making us tired, draining us, and we realize a boundary needs to be set. This is sometimes quite challenging when we're talking about relationships, right? Especially if we've been in relationships for a while and people are conditioned, we have conditioned them to deal with us a certain way. Because each one of us are individual, we have our own boundaries. My boundaries don't mean that the next person has the same boundaries. We all have to teach one another our own individual boundaries. If we're going to talk about children, because sometimes that's more easily understood and more digestible. But when we're dealing with children, how do we teach children about boundaries and expectations? If we have a child and we go to the store and we tell the child no to an item they want us to buy, and the child just throws a temper tantrum. So we go ahead and buy it so as not to have to deal with the temper tantrum. Next time we go into a store, the child wants something and we say no, and they throw a temper tantrum. We say no. The temper tantrum continues or escalates. We give in and we buy the item. We taught that child that our no can eventually be turned into a yes. So you can imagine what happens every time we go into the store and they want something. They're going to throw a temper tantrum because they know that that's the way to get what they want. That's what we've taught them in essence. Sometimes we're inconsistent. Our words and our actions ain't lining up, or we're not consistently applying something. If I tell my child that I'm going to take their electronic device in response to undesirable behavior, and sometimes I take it, sometimes I don't. A lot of times we're doing that and it's based on our mood, not necessarily the child's actions. If we're too tired to deal with it today or we're grumpy, we might give in just to not deal with it. Next day we have another energy level, another mindset, and so now we're standing in a boundary. But in that case, what we taught them is to monitor our moods. We think, well, you know better, but do they really? We're not consistent. They have learned to monitor our behavior as an indication of what we'll allow. Not our words, not whatever thing we've laid out for them. They've learned to monitor our moods as an indication as to whether something will be allowed because we haven't been consistent. Our moods are a more consistent indicator of what we'll allow. So that's, kids are pretty intelligent. And that's what we're teaching them. Adult relationships aren't very much different. I was in a relationship for something like 12, 13 years, and it wasn't a healthy relationship. We did not have a healthy dynamic, and I don't think we elicited the best out of each other. But in that relationship, that person knew I had taught them that my no could always be turned into a yes. I didn't even understand for most of those years that dynamic existed between us. I didn't know how often I let go of my boundary in an effort to maintain that relationship. I think it goes back down to a core root fear of rejection or abandonment. If I set this boundary and this person might leave me, or they won't love me the same, or whatever it was I had in the background program of my mind. Can't even recall at this point. I simply know that that person understood that my no could always be turned into a yes. Toward the end of that relationship, I ended up in more supportive, healthy relationships and had a supportive network around me at the time, and they helped me in setting boundaries. Maybe I feared less the idea of rejection or abandonment because I had these other supportive relationships. But anyway, I had raised my nephew for some time, and I had learned the importance of being consistent when it came to my parenting and setting boundaries for my nephew. Didn't even realize that I was not applying that same principle to my adult relationships. So anyway, this person knew that my no could be a yes. So I remember realizing that I needed to set some boundaries to help myself, to take better care of myself. I needed some boundaries in place. So I began to say no and stand in it. It wasn't easy at first. I had a lot of anxiety. Didn't always get a desirable result, but those supportive relationships helped me withstand that. But I said no and I stood in it. This went on for some months. I didn't even realize all the ways this person manipulated me until, in a matter of moments, they went through every manipulative tactic they had used on me, and then I could clearly see all the ways they had done it in the past. But they did it so quickly, in such a short span of time, I couldn't help but realize the contrast. So it's one evening, and I don't even remember what it was I was saying no to, but I had to say no. They hit the furniture, and I still said no. But this day, there was none of the anxiety, none of the stress. I had been doing this for months, and I was getting a lot better at saying no and standing in it. So there was none of that anxiety that I had experienced in the past, and I simply said no. I was quite curious and a little amused by what I was observing, though. But anyway, they hit the furniture, no. Then it started being the wheedling and the whining and the, making me feel like I was somehow a bad person, or I said I didn't love them because I wouldn't give in. I still stood in my no. They suddenly became loving and kind and complimentary. I still said no. And then they just stopped. It was the last time we had to go through that. Didn't take much longer before that person stopped coming around. They were no longer getting what it was they wanted from me. But I'd also come to understand that it's someone who couldn't understand a boundary and respect that didn't care for me anyway, and I had a lot less fear of losing them. Did I really want them in my life when they clearly did not care for me? Because if you're setting a boundary, and it may be a new boundary, people don't even understand why the boundary is there. But if you're communicating a boundary, you're doing it because you're trying to save that relationship. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be setting a boundary for them. So if you're communicating a boundary that you now need, and you're being consistent in it, and they can't hear it and won't respect it, that's probably a situation that needs to end. It took a long time to get to that point and to be able to do that. But sometimes what we've done, we've set the tone for relationships. We've set the tone in it and what we will allow and what we will accept. And that's not an easy pattern to change and break. It's not. You're going to have to be consistent. Your words and your actions are going to have to line up, and it's going to have to be done consistently. You're going to have to do it again and again and again. The same way you set the old pattern up. You set the old pattern up of inconsistency and taught people that that's what it was. And you did it again and again and again. That dynamic didn't develop overnight. So this new dynamic that you're trying to establish is going to take practice, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take actions matching the words and that being very consistent. It gets easier. Like I said, sometimes, adult relationships, we don't even realize it. Sometimes the easiest thing is to look and say, well, if this were a child, how would I deal with it? Because a lot of times what we're dealing with is adult children and grown people bodies. You know, some people haven't developed. They didn't develop past the childhood stage emotionally. And so that's what you're dealing with as an adult. And you have to kind of apply those. Sometimes our own inner children, we have to apply the same thing to ourselves sometimes. But anyway, it all gets easier over time. Just something I'm reflecting on. But I love you guys. We'll talk again soon. Bye.